In March of 2015, The Tale of Two Stands, arguably the most climactic and disorienting and thrillingly written episode of Gravity Falls, aired. In July of 2015, the follow-up, The Tale of Two Stands, aired, providing context on what happened and an intricate and poignant backstory episode that answers much needed questions while also, more importantly, weaving a tale of tragic disconnection between the two brothers. That is both a great story in of itself and an important warning for Dipper and Mabel. We are now between the 10th anniversary of A Tale of Two Stands and the earlier 10th anniversary of Not What He Seems. So I figured it was a fitting and appropriate time to make a kind of retrospective, looking back at these two episodes from the vantage point of 10 years later. And with enough context to properly understand how big of a change this really was for Gravity Falls. It brought the show to its endgame. So much of the show was about who is the author, what is the mystery of the author. And once that is revealed, the show moves pretty quickly into its endgame with Bill. Arguably, one could say a bit too quickly. When these episodes aired, I was 15 years old, and I, perhaps a bit overly optimistically, assumed that Not What He Seems and The Tale of Two Stands were the midpoint of the show, and we would be getting another season and a half after this of full dramatic build-up before the final confrontation with Bill at the end of a possible season 3. That didn't happen. But that is fine, considering that the episodes in the second half of season 2, from Northwest Mansion Noir, as I will always call it, the original name of that episode, to the end of the show, are some of the greatest episodes in the show. And unlike some shows, like Amphibia, that continue to dawdle with slice of life episodes after raising the stakes significantly and setting a time on how much show there was left, Gravity Falls, with the exception probably of the Roadside Attraction episode, moves pretty quickly after these enormous episodes into its finale. Not What He Seems is basically a perfect piece of television. I don't think it's the greatest episode of any show ever made, and I'm not even sure it's the greatest episode of Gravity Falls. Honestly, I think I would say that The Tale of Two Stands is better. But in terms of just immaculate storycraft, Not What He Seems is very difficult to beat. Every little beat of the episode is immaculately crafted to bring Dipper and Mabel into conflict with each other about the person who has been their caretaker for the entirety of the show, one of the people they have cared the most about in the world. Stan is revealed to have conflicted feelings about not having told them before, and he prepares to tell them the truth, but he does not really have the chance because the summer idol that the kids are living in is broken pretty abruptly when the agents of the government move into the scene, take Stan into custody, and start looking for the interdimensional portal that he has secretly been operating. Stan struggles to get back there as the anomalies strengthen so he can be there when the device fully activates, and manages to bring his brother back. Meanwhile, Dipper and Mabel are trying to free Stan at first and free themselves. While also growing increasingly skeptical about who Stan really is. The government agents are the antagonists in the sense that they are the force that Dipper and Mabel are working against, but they are not bad guys. They're a bit buffoonish, a bit bureaucratic sometimes, but they're not evil by any means. And a lot of what they say about Stan seems reasonable. Stan has been hiding a lot. Stan does have a lot of secrets. Much of what the government agents say is entirely plausible. And when Dipper increasingly thinks that maybe he was wrong about his uncle, maybe the agents are right, it is an entirely logical and reasonable progression of his beliefs. We realize that Stan Ford Pines is not his real name, which it isn't. It's Stan Lee. We realize that he's been going by a lot of fake names, which is true. We find out that he's been conducting secret operations and stealing government waste. All of that is true. Revelations pile up throughout the episode that seem to tip the judgment against Stan. Stan, meanwhile, knows this. He's aware of this in a way. And he wants to get back there. He wants to clear his name to the kids. He wants to see his brother again. He wants a chance to, number one, have his plans come to fruition, and number two, really explain everything and make things right with the kids. From a purely logical perspective, what Dipper is saying has a lot of weight, especially knowing what he knows. Mabel, meanwhile, has the emotional tie to Stan. She still believes in him. She still trusts him. And it's ultimately trust that is at the center of this episode. Who do you trust? Who do you believe when you don't know everything for certain? The episode has a lot of pieces to move, and it moves them in an organic way so that it doesn't feel too trite or too artificial when Mabel ends up having the power to decide everyone's fate. She has to decide whether to stop the doomsday device, as the agents believe it is, or not. She ultimately decides to trust Stan. She decides not to press the button to stop it. She places her hands up in the air and trusts in fate, trusts in her feelings. And she ends up being right. For as much as Gravity Falls is a show about puzzle solving, a show about logic and investigation, it is foremost a show about the incompleteness of that kind of perspective. We, as the audience, are perhaps more likely to be aligned with Dipper and Ford, the investigator, the wanderer, the explorer, trying to discover all the new secrets. And the show isn't always critical of that perspective. Like, Alex Hirsch himself is absolutely in that vein. He is the one who plants all these secrets in the first place. And yet the show is also critical of that perspective. It understands its limitations and the importance of heart, the importance of simply trusting the people you love the most in the world. And that leads us into The Tale of Two Stands, which is a tragic story about two brothers who are separated. They're separated for a lot of reasons. One has constant praise of his intellect, his wisdom, his knowledge, while the other is kind of a goofy loser, at least in the eyes of society. Both of them in New Jersey. Both face parental pressure. They have opposite fates. Stan Ford ultimately has to decide whether to trust Stanley, a clear echo of the choice we just got in episode immediately before that, Not What He Seems, where Dipper chooses not to trust him, and Mabel, even against the evidence, does. Ford is presented with a very similar choice, albeit on a much, much smaller scale. Did Stanley sabotage his experiment? Did Stanley sabotage his perpetual motion machine? He has every reason to believe that he did. There is evidence linking him to the scene of the quote-unquote crime. He has a motive to keep him back there. And the only thing Stanley has in his favor is his word, and that's not good enough for Ford. Even though we, the audience, know that Stanley is right, that it was just an accident. That series of events, regrettable, splits the brothers apart, and they stay apart. Stanford keeps working and he becomes successful, but he also becomes deeply isolated, building this little research cabin out in the woods and conducting research on all the anomalies of Gravity Falls. It's a successful life for him. He accomplishes a lot of what he set out to do, and yet it's also kind of a lonely life. Stan Lee is also lonely too, although for the opposite reasons. He is chased out of town by people. He is forced into a kind of isolation as he explores and wanders around the country, and even out of the country. Ultimately, he comes back to Stan Ford, and they have the opportunity to reconnect. But Stan Ford fundamentally rejects that connection. He decides, no, I can't trust Stanley. Stanley's kind of a loser. Stanley's not useful. And he tries to send him away. It is remarkable, then, that Stan Lee does so much over the next 30 years to try to bring Stanford back. Now, obviously, he feels guilty because, again, he made a mistake that had negative consequences for Stanford, even though it was not his fault. Sending Stanford into the portal, and he wants desperately to redeem himself. Yet I think it is pretty obvious that if the circumstances were reversed, Stan Ford would not be anywhere near as likely to sacrifice for Stan Lee. He would certainly not spend 30 years trying to bring him back from the void. And again, there is the central question here. Who do you trust? Who do you believe? Stan Ford is not a monster any more than Dipper is a monster for not believing Stanley. They both make reasonable, logical, justifiable decisions. But the show seems to be arguing for the importance of not doing that, for leading with the heart, for making the emotional decisions for those one feels a kinship and a connection toward, even if it is completely understandable why one would not want to do that. And there's such a deep sense of suspense and unease throughout these two episodes. Not simply the surprise of what ends up being the case, like, is Stan Lee guilty or not? But as importantly, how are these characters going to understand their circumstances? How are they going to react? Is Stan Lee going to be forgiven? Should he be forgiven? This is the suspense and the unease that is really at the soul and center of the episode. It goes back to that old Hitchcock paradigm between suspense and surprise. How surprise is only good for 5 seconds when something happens. A bomb blows up, it's surprising. If you see a bomb slowly ticking down and we go back and forth between characters as they discover that there's a bomb and try to contemplate and consider what to do about it, that's suspense. And suspense endures, even on rewatches. These episodes are remarkably strong pieces of character writing, and they're made even stronger by the process of Mabel really looking at what is happening and thinking. She's thinking a lot. Mabel does think quite a bit, even if not in the intellectual way that Dipper does. Like Sartre talks about thoughtfully, Jean-Paul Sartre, we're not in isolation. Our identities are not merely self-defined. We're constantly existing in the eyes and the minds of other people. And we are, to a certain extent, dependent on how others see us, how they look at us, what they think of us. Our existence is tenuous in that regard. Our being is tenuous. And there's a lot of that here. So much of the focus of The Tale of Two Stans especially, although even not what he seems, is not just what is true, but what do the kids think? How are they evaluating Stan Lee and later Stan Ford? What judgments are they making and why? These are incredibly important questions, and questions that the show rightly spends a lot of time on. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos just like this one before anyone else. Thank you all for your care and your concern. Keep watching Gravity Falls. It's a great show. Adios, comrades.